Welcome, everyone. My name is Shirley, and I will be your moderator this evening. Tonight's webinar is the No-Nonsense Guide to Intraoral Scanners, presented by Dr. Mark Ludlow, who leads implant dentistry and digital dentistry at the University of Utah School of Dentistry. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping suggestions. We'd love for this to be an engaging conversation. So if you have a question, we'd love to have you type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of our screen. We're going to address the questions at the end of the webinar, but feel free to enter them at any time that a question arises for you. CE is not available for this webinar this evening, but we will be sending out the recording to everyone who has registered. So tonight's conversation is being recorded, and we are going to send out that recording sometime over the coming week. In the meantime, welcome, Dr. Ludlow. Thank you for being with us tonight. We're excited to learn more, and I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I'm excited about this. This is a super fun topic because kind of in my opinion, this is where everything begins, is with the intraoral scanner, because I'm really, as was said, I'm really into digital dentistry and we do a ton of stuff with it. And, without the intraoral scanner, you really can't move too far. So that's where we're going to begin today, is just talking about this. And hopefully, anybody that comes with any questions, feel free to put those into the chat, because we can address them as, when we finish up and go from there. So what we want to kind of go through today, I've kind of figured out a couple different topics that I think are pretty relevant to us all. The first is this, it's why in the world, why are we talking about intraoral scanners? I'm sure some of us have it, some of us don't, some of us are thinking about getting it. And I want to start with why, because I think that's the most important thing. And to be honest, this is something that has changed dramatically for me from when we got our first scanner. That was in 2006. And, why I got it back then to why I have it now and use it now is very different. So we're going to look at the whys, and we're also going to look at a lot of the data behind scanning, because I think there's a lot of dogma relative to scanning. We want to actually see how good these things are and how they work. The second is we're going to look at different things to make it more practical and easier in your office, whether it's simple tricks to help you with scanning, to scan pattern, to different things like that, so we can make sure that you're getting the best scan that you can possibly have out of these machines. And the third thing is we're going to look at a bunch of different workflows of how you can actually apply the scanners and how they can work in your offices and go from there. So that's where we're going with things. But again, please, any questions you have, add them to the chat, because we'd love to hear them. So let's begin with this. And this is what I want us to begin with, is just thinking about what these things truly are and how they work. The thing I want us to start with is, what is a tool? A tool is just a piece of equipment that helps you use a job, or helps you to do a job. That's it. It's just something for us to be able to do our job and do our job well. And what we have to realize is these two things right here, they're both tools. Impression material is a tool, a scanner is a tool. They can both do very similar jobs, but each one of them is going to work slightly different. They each have different nuances. They each have a little bit of a learning curve. If you remember back to the first time you took your impression, it was a little bit rough. You've gotten better, 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 and better. And it's the same deal with scanning. All these things, what they are is they're tools to help us be better at our job and better at our profession. And I think that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind with these things, is that while each one can do a job, they're going to do it ever so slightly different with different nuances involved. But this is where I want us to begin. I want us to begin with, why are we even thinking about an intraoral scanner? If you have one, why did you get it? Why are you using it now? Why are you excited or not excited about using it? That's where the fundamental needs to begin, is why are we even thinking about it and talking about it? Because when we have patients, this is what we've conventionally done. We've gone ahead and taken impressions, we've packed cord, we've done all those different things. And again, we do similar type things with our scans. And again, this is the same patient scanned and impressed. But why may we pick up the scanner and use it on a patient versus just going what we've always done? And a lot of it, where I want to begin with, I could spend the next hour just talking about that. But what I really want us to look at and think about relative to these things is, when we've all been taking impressions and making them for so many years, I think we all realize that there are a couple little material limitations and some different issues that you can have with making impressions. And this is just a handful of them. I know if you've been practicing for any amount of time, pretty much everybody on here has had one of these things happen. So you've had pulls, you've had tears, you've had the material not setting up. You've had the material set up too quickly when it's set up, and then the other material hasn't. You've had its separation from tray or tray burn. There's just a bunch of different things that can go on with impression materials, and it's somewhat due to the material limitations of what we've always used and what we've always kind of worked with. And it's really interesting when you look at the kind of classical literature relative to impression making. The one that we most frequently talk about is this one by Gordon Christensen. And what he did back in 1997 is he went to a bunch of labs and he looked at the impression material and the impressions that were there. And what they saw was this, is that 50% of the impressions had deficient margins and 70% of them actually violated basic principles of impression. And you look at that and you go, well, come on, man. That was 1997. A lot has changed. We've changed. Our materials have changed. Everything's different. But what I find very interesting is when one of my colleagues, a guy by the name of Clayton Rao, when Clayton did his study, he basically did the exact same study just 20 years later. Looked at about 1,200 impressions from 3 different labs and found that 86% of them had at least one detectable error, and 70% of those were critical errors. And I start with that because while we espouse impression material to be the perfect thing and we never have any issues, all of us know that we can have issues, and a lot of this has to do with the issues that you can have just with the limitations of the material. And I think that's the reason why some people are starting to look at scanning if you haven't already, because we can get rid of some of these distortions and different things that we conventionally can have with conventional impression material. But in my opinion, that truthfully, while that's an important part, that to me isn't the most important part as to why one should be looking at getting an intraoral scanner and using the intraoral scanner frequently. What I think for me, the biggest reason why we may consider this is because of this. You can create a different experience for your patient than any other, any which way we've done it before. And to me, this is pretty important because I'm a prosthodontist. I'm here in Salt Lake City. If I get a rock, I blindfold myself, I spin around and I throw that rock, more than likely I'm going to hit a dental office. The next zip code down from where I live is it's the most saturated zip code that there is in the U.S. with dental per capita. And you look at this, and again, part of what you can do with the intraoral scanner is you can create a very, very different patient experience than what all the offices are doing that surround you. Because when we look at the data of what people like and dislike about going to the dental office, it's very interesting. And what I'm going to look at here is this hacker paper, and what they did is they looked at things that people hate about going to the dental office. And when we look at those and we quantify them, it's really interesting because the very first thing that people hate about going to the dental office, which I think we can probably all figure out if you think what people hate most about being treated at the dentist, it's the injection. It's very rare you ever have somebody come in and they're like, you ask, what are you here for? And they're like, well, I'm here for a shot. It's the greatest. Now, granted, look, if the patient needs endo, they're dying, that's probably what they need, and that's when they are going to come in for that. But every other patient in reality, according to this study and what we see in clinical practice, is nobody likes a shot. Everybody hates it. And that's the top thing on the list of what people don't like when they go to the dentist. But what's really interesting about this, if you look at the number 2 on the list, that's honestly in the same order of significance on the list, is the impression. Now look, this is a true prosthodontic impression right here, okay? If you're not border molding the primary bronchus, you're doing it wrong, okay? And I say that in jest, but the reality is this is sort of what the patient is hoping doesn't happen and they think is going to happen to them. It doesn't matter if you've never done this ever in your life before. This is what the patient's experience is when you're coming at them with a loaded impression tray. Now, for us in the dental field, this is commonplace to us. We start off, you hit the rite of passage in dental school. That day when you're filling up your tray, putting it in your buddy's mouth, alginate gone everywhere, and at that point you think, I've arrived, I've become, I'm finally part of the dental community. And so for us, it's commonplace. But for our patients, it's not commonplace. And when you really look at it, I find it so interesting that we're creating this relationship with them, that we want this long-term thing where we want them to be patients in our offices forever. And we're starting off on day one, taking impressions and doing something that they don't like. And that's not the type of patient experience that we want to help promote for patients. What we want is we want this type of experience, okay? I see this all the time. On day one, very first part of the visit, every patient I see gets scanned, okay? And I find it really interesting because we sit them down, we lay them down, we go ahead and scan them. And a lot of patients, they're looking over like this, looking at the screen. We put them up there saying, what is this? I have multiple people constantly taking pictures of this. And I love it because that's some of the best marketing you could ever have, because they take pictures of it, they go back to work, they show their friends, they show their family. And that's a really nice way to build a practice. I have never, ever to this day taken an impression on somebody and had them go, oh, doc, can I go ahead and take a picture of this? That's the best fin I've ever seen in my entire life. Okay, it doesn't happen, but I see this happen all the time with scanning. And I think it's one of those things from a marketing perspective that you also need to do, because what we do with patients is we go ahead and scan them, I sit them up, and then what we do is we say, look, here's your teeth. You've probably never seen them like this before, because no one has. Even us as dentists, we've never really looked at our teeth this way. But what I do is I go ahead and zoom it in and I kind of roll it back and forth and I say, look, you've never seen it like this before. Is there anything that you see that concerns you or you have questions about? Because you've never seen your mouth actually before, ever. And it's really a great thing, because then the patient looks at their scan and goes, well, yeah, whoa, what's this? Why does this look like this? Or why is this like this? Or man, my bite really is pretty tight through there. Or yeah, why is, what's this black stuff back here? And it really can go a long way to helping you with the patient be able to figure out what's going on with them and help them get some really good interest in their own mouth and help go through a co-discovery phase with them relative to these things. And so that's one of the biggest things that I think scanners do for us, is to create this different experience and allow us to talk to patients in a very different way than we have been in the past. Now, it's not just their experience, but it's our experience. As I stated, I first got into scanning in 2006. Back then, we could take one picture. You'd flood it with powder, you'd take one picture. If you're great, you could take about 3 pictures, and that was about it. Nowadays, this is 4 of kind of the most common scanners that we see on the market. Again, same patient, all in real time, everything. And you can see with it, basically, almost all these scanners, what they have is they have a tip about the size of my remote, okay, the head, and you put it in there, you follow a certain pattern. It's a live video camera, and you can create a digital representation of the patients. Now, again, you can see some of them are faster. We can see the upper left. We're already on the lower arch for that one. Some of them colors a little bit better. Some of them it's not quite. Some of them has a little bit smaller field of view. They're all slightly different, but it's generally the same principle of that we've got a scanner that we're going to put in the mouth and go ahead and create this type of scan pattern so that we can go ahead and register what the patient has. Now, when you first get into scanning, this is one of the interesting things in life. I'm a Yankees fan, so that's what's going on with this picture of Rivera, because he's my favorite player ever. And I think all of us, from an impression-making standpoint, that's where we are. Okay, you guys can take anything and get a very nice quality impression made. But it's because you've had so many reps and you're so good at it. But when you first get a scanner, you revert back to almost like my son here, where he's just excited to have the juice box and the ball and just is pumped at that perspective. And when you first pick up a scanner, to be truly honest, some scanners are easier than others. Now, if we compare it back years ago, I can't even imagine how good the scanners are now versus what we used to have. But when you look at scanners and you look at the ability to scan and the ease of use of scanning, what we see with this is in this particular paper, what we did is we took inexperienced scanners. They were dental students who have never scanned anybody before, and experienced scanners, those of us that do this for a living. And what we did is we were scanning full arch implant cadaver molds, okay? And what was really interesting is there were some scanners that pretty much across the board got very good results and made it much easier to scan these type of things than other scanners. And what we see as well with this is when we look at the data, there are some scanners that even if you're inexperienced, can still get you basically the highest level of fidelity as someone that has scanned for a long time, okay? And so that's one of these things when you look at a scanner is go ahead and get your rep in there, bring a couple scanners, you scan your assistant, have your assistant scan you, and really feel the difference between these things because there are slightly different nuances in how you scan. And some, truthfully, are a little bit easier to scan than other scanners. But the reality is scanners are getting so darn good, it's making our life significantly easier to do these different things. Now, if we compare and contrast where we used to be with scanning to where we are now, it's very interesting. Now, if we look at the scan on the left with the blue background, this is at that time, this was about 10 or 11 years ago. And at that time, this was literally the best scanner on the market. You compare and contrast that and come forward 10 years, you see the scanner on your right with the gray screen here. And what it was, the scanner on the left is us scanning that have scanned forever, doing the very best job that we could as quick as we could. Versus if you look here on the right, this was a dental student. This was his very first scan ever. And when we look at both of those, you can just see in the amount of time it takes for the old one just to focus and start. The student on his literally his first scan ever, he's most of the way through the arch, coming back, and now just grabbing the facials of everything. And he was able to scan a lower arch first time ever. And I think it was about 27 seconds to get the whole thing scanned. And so these things can be extremely fast from a user perspective. They can make it really easy to learn and pick up so that you and your staff members can start assimilating these things quite easily. Now, here's the rub with it all. I don't care if you can have the greatest patient experience ever, if they're really fast, if things aren't accurate, because this is where the rubber meets the road, is all of us want our restorations, our night guards, whatever it is we're doing out of these things, we want these things just to drop right in and fit extremely well. And it doesn't matter if it's got all these other intangible benefits if they're not accurate enough to give us this type of thing. And this has been something, honestly, which we first started studying this in about 2012. And so it's been a number of years where we've looked at accuracy getting better and better and better and better. And what I want to show you is just kind of one of our latest papers on this. And what we found out years ago was we found a great study design. How we used to always do these things is we'd have these souped up typodonts or whatever made out of specific types of PMMA that fluoresce like enamel. What we do is we'd scan those with all the different scanners and get a rough accuracy rate. And that's what we'd say, it's X number of microns accurate. Well, that was great back in the day, but the reality is what it didn't do for us is it didn't really present how a patient presents. It didn't have amalgam, it didn't have composite, it didn't have enamel, it didn't have dentin, didn't have tissue, it wasn't wet. It wasn't all the different things that we run into when we actually scan patients. And so in about 2018, Wally, Renee, and myself came up with the study design to where we would take cadavers, and what we would do is we would get those industrially scanned. Okay, it cost us $2,000 to do our very first scan on this industrial scanner, but that scanner could scan down to about 2 to 3 microns of trueness, which is extremely, extremely accurate. And then what we would do is we would take that cadaver model, scan that with all the different scanners, and we're able to actually get some data that represented what we see in the mouth. And this is the latest version of it. And what we did on this one is we took this cadaver sample, we scanned it with a number, pretty much every scanner out there on the market, okay? And then we also took a multitude of conventional impressions so we could compare and contrast the two. And what we saw in this is when we take the best scanners to the worst scanners and we put them all in a bowl and mix it up, where we are at from an industry perspective as far as full arch scanning with full arch accuracy, we're to the tune of about 40 microns, okay? Which is actually quite outstanding. You look at that number though, and you go, well, come on, 40? Before I turned 40 seemed like a pretty big number, okay? But the reality is, when you look at what that number means, what 40 microns really means, and you put that in context of other things that are in the micron scale, it's pretty insane where we're at these days. Because when you look at something such as a red blood cell, the diameter of a red blood cell is 8 microns, okay? And if you're not follicularly challenged and can pop out one of your hair and look at it, a hair is between 100 and 180 microns. So I just split the difference here at 140. But that is where we're at. 40 is extremely small. It's about 5 red blood cells is all. So scanners are doing extremely well these days, and we're getting extremely good results. But it's not just, arches and stuff we scan. People's mouth have all sorts of different things in there. That's why I really like looking at things like this that are systematic reviews. Because when you look at the Bandiaki, and I think this is probably one of the best systematic reviews out there, what we see is, again, when they look at it versus conventional, conventional did not beat out scanning. There's no difference in accuracy. You have nothing to worry about it, the accuracy of conventional impression making versus scanning. You see this, what you can build off of this, all your restorations, no difference in marginal adaptation or marginal gap. But what you always see in these studies, and again, what I mentioned at the very beginning is this, it is significantly more comfortable to the patient. Okay, the patients usually prefer the scan significantly more than impression material. Okay, and so again, our data shows it, the systematic reviews show it. These are the things that we should not be fearing. And it's not just the accuracy of full arches. We also have to look at the accuracy of the different types of materials in there. And this was a study we did a few years ago, because if anybody scanned before and you see some of these materials in there, there's nothing quite as fun as scanning pretty much, all posteriors of gold in there. Things scan differently. And when we looked at how different things scan, we created that typodon so we could go ahead and segment it out and look at all the different materials and see how good or how bad it scanned. And we also looked at full arch. And when we look at these different things and we look at the trueness, and that's just a real fancy word to say how accurate it is from a reproducibility perspective of if it looks like this, it truly is this. And what we want on these box plots is you want the smallest possible plot that you can find. And when we look at a couple of the different things, when we look at cross arch, for example, we got all the way down to 18 microns, and this was in 2019, okay? 18 microns, 30, 40 microns, all the way up from there. And even with gold, you can see that a lot of these machines are scanning to the 20 and 30 micron range with gold. So again, these things can scan extremely accurate, and they do a very good job. Now, it's not just the accuracy of the arch itself, but what we also need to gauge is the accuracy of how good the occlusion comes in. Now, these are just some screenshots from, again, that patient, which I showed earlier. Again, when we look at the 4 different types of scanners, 4 different brands, I should say, and again, we can see where the occlusal marks are. And again, on most of these, the occlusal marks are very, very, very similar between all the different machines. And this is a very important part. And how you go ahead and make the occlusion on these things is basically you just have the patient bite, you put the scanner in there and scan until either it makes a sound, both arches show up. Every scanner is a little bit differently, but you can see how quick you can go ahead and just take one of these things. It usually takes maybe 3 to 5 seconds to take an occlusal scan. Now, when we look at the data relative to the occlusion that we can get with scanners versus what we've always done with conventional PVS, I think this paper right here, this Reese's paper, is probably the best one out there. And what they did is they looked at this. They looked at mandibular deviation. That's how we see if we've got a problem with occlusion, okay? And they had 3 different groups in it. The first group was the intraoral scan group, and then they had 2 PVS groups. One is using PVS how we've always conventionally used it, have 2 casts, take your PVS, go ahead and mount it that way, see how good it is that way. And then the PVS2 was a little bit different, where they were looking at a scannable impression bite material so that they would go ahead and articulate it and pop it off and then just scan that. And what they saw with, again, the mismatch of the occlusion, the mandibular deviation, were the following things. With the intraoral scanner, it was down to about 50 microns or 0.05 millimeters, which is absolutely outstanding. And when you look at the PVS, 2 different types of PVSs, you were roughly about a 0.5 millimeter off. And this is pretty much what you see in most of the systematic reviews as well, is that when we go ahead and mount things conventionally, we're off about, 1/4 to a 0.5 millimeter almost always with these things. If we also want to not only get a static bite, but get a dynamic bite, how we've always had to try to do those in the past is go ahead and take different things called check bites. We'd have the patient move into their different lateral excursives, move to the protrusions, and go ahead and take bite registrations that way. And then what we'd have to do is we'd have to go ahead and get our articulator, and this video is made by my buddy Brian Jacobs, but we'd have to undo everything on the articulator, put these little check bites in to register where that is, to best simulate as good as we could a dynamic motion, okay? But it's still a static thing that we're using here to register all of this. Well, the cool thing about a lot of these different intraoral scanners these days is we can actually go ahead and register dynamic motion. We can register the chewing stroke so we can see how that works. We can have them go into their different excursive motions so we can register that and see how far they go into their lateral excursions, how far from a protrusive aspect they go. But these are some things that we've never, ever, ever been able to do before. And the really cool thing about doing this is all this can get integrated into the laboratory software designs. So these numbers we're able to use and all these movements we're able to use to be able to design our final restorations or whatever it is we're doing. Okay. Now, just a couple little words of caution and tips relative to this. With digital articulation, if you saw in that last video and you see here, with pretty much everything that I do on the opposing arch, I will always go ahead and go tap, 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 tap with articulating paper. And then I will scan it so that we can actually see the marks on the teeth. Because the reality is all these things are in color, so we can see the marks of the paper. And then when you go ahead and digitally articulate things together by having the patient close, every scanner pretty much on the market will give you a heat map like this so that you can see where the teeth are coming together. And this is the great thing is that if the marks line up with your heat map, you're good. Before the patient even leaves, you've verified the bite, okay? And if they're off, well, then you've got a problem. You've got to figure out whether your marks were wrong or whether, again, your scan was wrong. But that is one of the best things. It's so simple. Just put the articulate paper and tap, 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 and then make sure the heat map matches up. I love this, especially for my big cases like we see here, because I've never had literally the occlusion come in so well on these types of cases due to being able to verify it before the patient actually leaves. Now, the one word of caution I will tell you is on some of the scanners, this one in particular, watch what it does. We start scanning the patient, we're scanning the bite, both of them snap together. It takes just a couple seconds to get it snapped together. And whenever you do that, just stop and watch what the computer does, because if you look at this and watch it, you see it slightly morphed it a little bit. And that's one of the things that goes on with this particular scanner. Every so often, you just get that. And you saw it only was closed on the one side, so you go to the other side, take a secondary bite. And now watch what it does here too, okay? It ever so slightly cocks it and move it. Now, this doesn't happen across the board on scanners, but this sometimes can happen on some scanners. And thus, if that happens, you've got to go ahead and delete out the bite, start back over, get a new bite, rescan it, etc. But again, that's why I love having all these articulation marks on there from the paper so that I can make sure that everything is lining up and getting right where we want it to go. All right, let's move on from kind of scanning basics to general tips and tricks to help you scan better. The first is this. Let's talk about retraction. I'm not talking about cord or ex-bacil or anything like that. I'm talking about macro retraction. I think one of the biggest things you can do to help yourself from a scanning perspective, whether it's you or your staff scanning, is to get the lips out of the way. And the way that I like getting the lips out of the way the best is through an object. Okay, this is just a little piece you can buy. It gets lips completely out of the way. They're disposable. We put that in there. And again, that just gets everything out and makes scanning significantly. So that's the first tip. And again, that's the thing that I see most dramatically help people scan full arch stuff is by getting the lips out. Second thing is, and this is kind of from the beginning perspective, is figuring out where in the world you're supposed to look. When we take conventional impressions like this, we all know where we're looking. We're using terrible posture. We're going down like this. We're injecting in. We're seeing everything with direct sight. And that's where we look. Well, how about when we use the scanner like this? What do we do in that aspect? Well, what you do is you have to get used to looking at the screen. And I first start at the live screen, which you see on the left. And then once the model starts building on any of the scanners, then I am focused on that model being built. Because as we see that model being built, you can see little areas where the background is kind of poking through. And you can see those are the areas you have to go back and fill back in. Now, again, I know there are some people that just look completely in the mouth and go off of the sound, because as long as you're creating a model and it's being able to stitch and put it all together, you'll be hearing a sound. But it's so much easier to get used to looking at the screen, because then you can see exactly where you need to fill and go from there. And what it truthfully is it's the skill that these kids have learned and absolutely mastered. Now, it's really interesting because if you look at the kid in the red, if he's down there looking at his controller the whole time, his brother or his buddy is going to absolutely destroy him in the game. And that's one of the things. When you first start getting the scanners, it's going to feel super awkward to be looking at a screen like this. But just give yourself a little bit of time, do a little bit of practice, because the reality is you've already learned something just like this, and it's through the mirror. Okay, you know how to do it. The only difference is instead of looking right here, you're just going to look up ever so slightly. Okay, so that is another thing which we need to do. The final thing which we'll kind of look at is this, does it really matter how to scan? This has been kind of a labor of love from a data perspective with my colleagues and I, because when we first started looking into this, we'd call up companies and say, hey, how do you scan? And they'd say, well, I just kind of go like this, wave it around a couple times, and boom, you got a model. But you have to realize how these things work, and the accuracy of scanners come from two things. One, they come from the hardware that is in your scanner. It's just like your phone. We get new iPhones or get new whatever. The cameras get better and better and better because of the processor and the megapixels and different things like that. And that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is called algorithmic accuracy. And it is how the 3D models are actually built. And it's built through math. And you've got to give that math the data in a certain way to be able to get the best product out there. And when we first started looking at this and looking at a bunch of different types of ways of scanning and different things to scan, what we first started seeing in our papers was we first started looking at quadrants. And it was really interesting because, again, most of the time from a restorative perspective, that's what people are scanning for is, we're scanning quadrants because we're just doing a single tooth there, designing it, milling it, going from there. Well, from the quadrant perspective, pretty much all the scanners out there, it really didn't matter how you scan. You could basically follow any pattern whatsoever you wanted in there, and you'd get a pretty darn good result. It was within about 5 to 10 microns each, and again, pretty insignificant. Where this really, though, matters is when you start looking at full arch, whether it's full arch implants, full arch on teeth, whether you're doing a diagnostic full arch or clear aligners or anything like that. You need that full arch scan to be the best possible scan that we can get. And what we found with this is most people, when we talk to them about where to scan, they don't know. They say, well, do we do something like this where we kind of jig it around, buckle the lingual and go all the way around? Do we just start lingually and kind of go from there, then fill in the rest? And the reality is the answer to that question isn't as simple because it 100% depends on the skin. Because it's that algorithmic accuracy you're trying to maintain and give the scanner the data in the way that it wants to. Okay? And how we kind of originally started looking at this is we started discovering scanning errors in our papers. And this really hit us in 2016 because we were running, a trial. And what we saw was, for some random reason, we're scanning a model, the same person was scanning the same model, and this scan was great on trial 1. Trial 6, it was 150 microns off. Trial 7, it was, 30 microns on. Trial 8, back to 150. And we found that there was a big error issue in that completely done by how you scan. And this was illuminated in the Mueller paper because what they saw was they were looking at the trios back then. And the basic scan pattern of the trios was kind of start lingually, go back occlusally, come back buccally. Well, what they found in their paper was just by inverting that, starting facially, going occlusally, then lingually, that lost 100 microns of accuracy just like that without you even being able to see that that was going on. Now, when we ran our trials, again, this was 2018, we saw that it had gotten smaller to whereas, the difference in scan rate was about 65 microns. Where are we at today? We don't know because we're going to rerun this thing and see where we're at. But the reality is you've got to talk with, whichever scanner you end up going with, talk with the manufacturer and see the best way to be able to scan things. The great thing these days is the algorithms have gotten so much better. This was a denture that I scanned that I deliberately screwed up the scan to show you what the algorithm can do. What I did on this is I just went back through and rescanned the area and then just let the algorithm do its thing. So I sat back, hung out for a little bit, and it's thinking, and boom, it smashes it all back together. Then I've just got to go fill in a couple of the little spots. And that's where we're at nowadays. The algorithms are so much better than they ever used to be. It's really interesting, watching, especially on our Trios 5, you can see it morphing the model each time as you go and scan, just depending upon how you're scanning it. It's really quite cool. What we have found kind of from our data is these are the general scan patterns that you have for the different scanners. But these things can change with software updates. So what I recommend to everybody watching this is if you want the best fidelity or you've had some problems with fit, make sure you talk with your company, whoever it is, whichever brand of scanner you bought, and ask them what is the preferred scan pattern for their particular machines, because you want to give those algorithms the data in the best possible way. Okay? Now, let's put it all together. This is just some basics to help you scan, especially if you're in the very, very, very beginning stages of scanning or you haven't scanned at all. The first thing is this. We're going to look, again, this is the same patient we took all the scans on, and we had multiple cameras going on at the same time with him. First thing, when you're doing the upper arch, okay, you're going to be sitting right behind the patient, okay, he's in the 12 o'clock position. The scanner is right in front of you, right next to the patient, so that as you scan, you can see. Now, again, we start this, and again, we follow the same scan pattern where we're going to go lingual first. We're going to go lingual all the way around the arch. Now, again, usually we don't go through this and go do the palate on this, but again, this is all live stuff. So did the palate there, come back occlusally with a little bit of a facial bias and have the patient close down, and you're going to go back through and do the facial surfaces. Okay, that's the general scan pattern that we use for this particular scanner, and then to be truly honest, in most of our patients, because that is the scan pattern which works the best for most of the scanners, at least that we've seen. Okay, so that's how you do it. Again, 12 o'clock position, scanner right in front of you. And again, you'd be amazed at how just positioning yourself and the scanner relative to the patient in the right spot makes a big difference to scanning quickly and scanning accuracy. Now, from the lower arch, you're going to go ahead and move. You're going to, again, if we're right-handed like this, we're just going to be in about that 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock position. And again, same deal. Your patient's going to be here. You're right next to the patient. The scanner is right in front of you. Okay? You're going to follow that same pattern. And this is especially important on the lower arch because when we start off going lingually through here, what we're doing is we're getting the lingual surfaces of all those teeth first before the tongue can flop. Because we can go ahead and get that ideally first. We come back occlusally, again, have the patient close down, come back facially through there, and that's how you get the scan, and you can get it quite quick. That's why we're kind of laughing in that video a little bit, because we were just able to get it so bloody fast up there. Now, we're going to look at the same scan from a different camera angle, because sometimes what people have problems with is when they go ahead and scan this way, is where the problem sometimes lies, is you go lingual first, you get the occlusal, then as you're going through the facial, you almost have to take that scanner and flip it 180 degrees and continue on. Well, what we teach relative to these things is you start off and go lingual through it, come back occlusally, then as you go facially, we will go ahead and roll the scanner through the front and do a 180 as you're scanning still to go back the other way. So pay attention to the hand movement as you can see it from this different view, because this is, again, this is just easiest, quickest way to maintain it. And it's just a 180 kind of fan through the front. So again, here's the lingual again. Coming back. We'll go occlusally with a little bit of facial bias on there. And now watch it coming through the front and just rolling across the front like that and going back. That little trick can really help you from having to pick the scanner up, turn it 180 degrees, and go back the other way. Okay. Now the bite is pretty darn simple. Just have the patient close, CR, CO, whatever your flavor is. Get them to where you want them, scan it. It usually just takes a couple seconds to get the bite. And then we can get some very nice occlusion on these things and get things where we want. Okay. So that's just some practical helps. If you're new to scanning or you want to improve your scanning, a lot of it just has to do with where you're sitting, where the scanner is relative to the patient. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and kind of finish things off here looking at some different workflows. Okay. Because there's a variety of different things. Again, we could spend all day talking about these and getting in the nitty-gritty nuances. But what I want to do is kind of look at this from about 20,000 feet and also look at it just a little bit of the data relative to these things so that you can see just all the different stuff that we can do with intraoral scanners. We're going to first look at diagnostics because I think that is, again, every patient that comes in, immediately I'm scanning them so that we have a record of what they came in. Secondarily, this is probably where I use it the next most is crown and bridge work, conventional crown and bridge. Actually, you know what? Where I actually use it the most, because again, being a prosthodontist, most of my stuff is actually implant related. So we're going to look at simple implant workflows and complex workflows. And it's one of the most kind of cool things you can do with it is denture workflows. And I found this very interesting because was it Thrive Live, presented there a couple weeks ago and was on the floor and was looking at one of the new scanners out there. And it was interesting because this doc came up and was looking at the scanner and was like, oh man, can I do dentures with this? And the rep was like, I don't know if we can do any denture stuff. And I kind of looked at the rep and I'm like, bro, you could do a lot of awesome denture stuff with your scanner. You just, it's that old adage, you don't really know what you don't know. And you can do them with all these different things. So I decided to throw this in to show you just briefly a couple of the different things that you can do. So let's start off with the diagnostics, because like I say, that to me that's my bread and butter every day, all day. The scanner's fired up, taking diagnostic scans of our patients or new patients as they come in. Now with it, again, what you're going to want to do is just you, your assistant, whomever, you want to take scans and get all the exact same things that you normally would, okay, that you want from a good conventional impression. We want the teeth, we want the vestibule, we want the palate, we want everything on there, upper arch, lower arch, and bite. Okay, usually takes 5 or so minutes to do all these things, and we've got a very good record. Now that can be for diagnostics. That can help us kind of figure out where we're going with cases and different things like that. But this exact same type of scan applies for occlusal guards, for clear aligners, for anything you want to make on this stuff. It can work and works the same because it's all that pattern of upper arch, lower arch, and bite. Now, that's the first thing. Conventional crown and bridge is exactly the same. The only difference on conventional crown and bridge is instead of scanning just the teeth, you're scanning the teeth prep. Now, the same principles apply to these things that apply to every crown and bridge work. We have to have nice preps. We have to have nice retraction. You have to have nice heme control. Those are all different things that you have to have. If it's 1.5 miles deep, that's when I use the different tool. I will switch to impression material because I can push down there. With scanners, again, it's a beam of light. You can't retract tissue with a beam of light. So you have to make sure you've got good retraction, good heme control, all those different things from a crown and bridge perspective. Now, with it, one of my favorite things is the second we're done, we can hit the button and it immediately goes to the lab. Because again, I don't know about you guys, with myself and my assistant, we are just abysmal about getting things off to the lab on time. So that's why I love digital, because it's just hitting a button and boom, it's already there. So the lab can start fabricating things. We can get very nice results and go from there. Okay. Now let's talk about a couple of little nuances with it. When you look at crown and bridge, a lot of times for packing cord, or we're doing different things in there. What you can do is you can actually rescan these things. So we can go ahead and scan it with the cord in there. Then what we can do is we can go ahead and digitally cut out where the cord is and then rescan where the margins are, and you can get the retraction that way. If you happen to be scanning, got a little blood over one of your preps, well, don't worry about it. Finish your scan, go back to that area, cut out that area where you have the heme, repack, viscostat the living heck out of it, repack, pull that and rescan that area and just get that. That way you've only got to scan that one little thing versus having to scan, having to take a full nother impression of the patient. Okay. The other thing which this does for you is it's really interesting. I still remember this when I got my first scanner, because your preps go from being this big to then blown up 8 million times on the screen. And I remember going, wait a sec, who came in and, nibbled on my prep and nicked and dinged the living out of this? And what it did is it actually made me become a better dentist and get much better at my preps, because I could blow them up so high and be able to see where I had screwed up, and just this little divot here, little divot there. And again, rescanning is great, because if you have a little area that didn't come out really well, just rescan that area. You have to use a little bit of caution though. And again, this was illuminated in the Gomez Polo's paper of what they saw with rescanning. If you rescan just a little bit, a little area like we see on our left with those little circles, no problem. You're going to have good fidelity. It's going to stitch in well. The problem is if you have a major mess up and you have to rescan kind of a quadrant, at that point, just throw your scan away and start completely over, because your precision drops pretty dramatically. You have to cut a large part of the scan out to be able to do it. Now, one other thing is a lot of the scanners will allow you to have a black and white option. We always, especially with our students, we check everything in the black and white mode, because if you look at this one right here in the color mode, you can see the margin here. At least you think you can. You get over to the black and white mode and you can't see it there. So that part we had to cut out, repack, rescan that area, have the student do that to get us in a better rep. Now, if we move up to implant types of restorations, it's exactly the same workflow. Scan the upper, scan the lower, scan the bite. The only thing else you're going to add here is you're going to add this little piece that we see here called the scan body. And again, this was a brand new student scanning for the first time these things. And again, it goes ahead and gets this. And what the scan body does, what they do is it doesn't matter if it's a scan body like this, like you see in, like you just saw in that video, one like this. It's the exact same thing. You just have to talk with your lab and make sure that which one they have in their software, and you use that particular one. But these purposes are the exact same as this. It's to register where the implant is. Now, the interesting thing with it, when we go back to that patient experience, this lovely paper by Haddadi was a split mouth design where they took conventional impressions on the one side, scans on the other side, and they were looking at discomfort, and they were looking at the time it took to do these things. From the discomfort level, 1 being completely comfortable, 100 being very uncomfortable. When you looked at the scan body, it clocked in as a 6, the intraoral scan. Very, very comfortable, easy to use. When you looked at conventional, it dropped to a 73. Pretty uncomfortable. And again, this is just, I hope you see the story over and over and over again, is patients generally prefer the scanner. Now, when you look at it from a time perspective, this is what was absolutely very interesting. About 5 minutes total for all the scans and everything that you'd need for the intraoral scanner use versus about 15 minutes for conventional. Okay. Now, that's for a simple implant. The reality is these are all the same type of scans that you just saw from the diagnostic side. All you're adding on is that scan body. For the bigger stuff, kind of the more full archy stuff, well, guess what? It's the exact same process and protocol. We scan the upper temps, the lower, we scan the bite, take off the prosthesis, scan the scan bodies that are in there, and scan the tissue, okay? The great thing about this is everything comes in cross-arch mounted in the right occlusion, verified by all those dots that we see on there, and get us right where we need to. Now, when you look at the accuracy of these things, we've looked at this for a while as well, and we can see that the accuracy is anywhere, again, for full arch implant realm, about 43 microns to about 72 microns, okay? Now, finally, we're going to just end real quickly here on denture cases. And what you do when you scan denture cases, I think the best place you can use your scanner for a denture is in the patient that comes in and wants a new denture. This is called a reference denture technique, because what the patient has right there in their old dentures, this is honestly just a custom tray, okay? They've built in the relief themselves by their bone resorption, okay? And what you're able to do with these things is go ahead and just wash it. Now, don't put any tray adhesive on it if you're planning on giving it back, because you'll spend the next hour getting the friggin' tray adhesive out of that. Ask me how I know. But you go ahead and do this, wash it, border mold, do everything like that. Then go ahead and scan it. Scan the lower arch, scan the bite, and then that gives us everything which we need to know. Because from there, what can happen is you just write down everything you want changed versus the teeth. And what you can do is you can send this to your lab, the scan to your lab. And what your lab does with that scan is they can put it into their software. They will go ahead and virtually pour it. That's how you get your master cast. And then from there, you've also got your occlusal rib because you've got the old teeth there. And you just need to modify everything and kind of change everything up relative to that. And that way you're able to get some really nice dentures made in one visit so that the second visit you're delivering them and off you go. Now, the question I get, and we'll end on this, the question I get all the time is, well, what about the fully edentulous patient? Can I scan them for dentures? And the reality is you can. If you look at our data, again, you see pretty good results. Again, we see it's starting to decrease a little bit from an accuracy perspective because it's all tissue, but you're between about 75 and 100 microns. The thing that I would say is this, though. While you can, and you can see where the keratinized tissue is, so you can see where your extensions are, what you can't see is you can't see how the muscles activate. So you can't see the thickness of the flange. And the other issue that you have is you don't have an ability unless you make a rim or something, to be able to put in there to be able to figure out where the teeth need to be and how to get the occlusion when it's just two edentulous arches. So when people come in with just two edentulous arches, I snap two alginate, I make a quick custom tray, and I put a bite rim on there. I wash it, then I scan both of those. So hopefully with all this, kind of in conclusion, you can see why you may want to use a scanner, what some of the data is behind it, what are some of the tricks and nuances that can hopefully help you improve your scanning, and then look at the workflows from the various different applications. So thank you guys all so much for hanging out. I know it's late on the East Coast. It's not quite so late on the West Coast, but I appreciate you all being here with me. If anybody has any questions, that's my email below. Feel free to email me with anything. And thank you guys for spending a little bit of time with us this evening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Ludlow. That was comprehensive and super edifying. So thank you for walking this audience through this tonight. And yeah, thank you. And as Dr. Ludlow just said, we'd love to hear questions from you. So this is a good time to go ahead and enter your questions into the Q&A chat box below. In the meantime, Dr. Ludlow, what are some frequently asked questions that you get about the procedure?
I would say the most frequent question I get when I speak about scanners is everyone pulls me up after and goes, they kind of look around and go, okay, which one should I buy? Like that, I get that more than like anything. And the reality is, what I tell people is, honestly, I think the best thing you can do, talk with your Schein rep. They've got demo units. They've got different things. Bring them on in, try them in your office. You scan your assistant scans you, and feel which one feels good to you guys, which one that you and your assistants and your staff can scan well. That's what I'd say to do, because, luckily I've got access to pretty much all the scanners, and I try them, and they're all generally pretty good, but different scanners are slightly better at different things than other stuff. And my needs as a prosthodontist may be very different than someone else's needs. And so that's why I say, talk with your reps, just because they know very well what is out there and what they have. And And, and just bottom line is try it and see which one feels the best to you and kind of go from there.
That's a really good point. And we do have a comment here from Dr. John Torres. Thanks. I needed that ! Good. So more feedback there.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's the type of thing where, man, I think what happens all the time with us is we're so scared of something new and different coming out that it paralyzes us from buying. And we keep waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And in the meantime, we're just kind of spinning our wheels a little bit. Like, man, these scanners work so great at this point that, like, just get one, start using them, get excited about it, get your staff excited about it, because they're going to run the ship. So, I mean, it's just yesterday, we had this new patient come in. My staff took the CBCT. I walked in, she was scanning the upper and lower arch before I've even said one word to the patient. And, it's just because she loves scanning and is excited about it. And that's just the kind of excitement you need to try to get with these things. So it's no better time than right now to get into it.
So true. They are fun to use, and what the results that one finds that really makes it more exciting. This question here from Dr. John Torres: is an Omni scan still relevant these days? I have one, but it is very underutilized. I need to take advantage of this instead of dusting it off every other month.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, the OmniCam, obviously the prime scan's the newer technology, again, but, newer hardware. But if you have one, the great thing about the OmniCam and pretty much all of these things is, like I say, we get worried like, oh, shoot, I've got to buy this new thing and then this new one comes out. Well, improvements are made incrementally through software. That's where most of the improvements that we see with the scanner, it gets better and better and better due to the software. And the OmniCam's the type of thing where, back in the day for full arch, oh my gosh, I groaned whenever I'd have to do a full arch on the OmniCam because it just wasn't great for it. That's why I was so excited when the Prime Scan came out. But what they did is they updated the software on the OmniCam. The OmniCam's actually a pretty darn good scanner with the newer updated software. So that's the type of thing is whatever scanner you have, just start using it, get used to using it, and just realize that every time it dings you and says update, you want to update that because that's going to get your scanner better and better and better. So yeah, dust it off, squeegee it down, start scanning people because you've got one and you may as well use it.
Thank you, Dr. Ludlow. And Dr. John Torres says it is fully updated, just to pick a comment.
Yeah, then you should be pretty good from an accuracy perspective because it has definitely bumped up the accuracy with that new software.
Very good. This next one is from Dr. Cynthia Levenka. Do you take PVS impressions when you have subgingival
margins?
Yes.
Yeah. It all comes down to how good I can isolate it. Okay. We've all had those ones. And again, I especially get them as a prosthodontist because I get interesting cases sent to me. Let's just say that. But the reality is, we've had those that are 90 feet deep. Okay. They're bleeding like a sieve. That's when I would choose, I talked about tools at the very beginning. That's when I choose a different tool. I mean, that's when I move to PVS. If I can't get it to stop bleeding, it's way down there. You have to think of the scanner as a flashlight. If I can shine a flashlight down there and I can see my margin and I can get my margin isolated enough, that's when I'll use my scanner. If I can't get it isolated enough, there's nothing wrong with picking up PVS, squirting it down there because you can get pushing with the PVS and kind of push things out of the way. And so use the right modality for the right tool. There's nothing wrong with taking a PVS if you need to. And I think sometimes we get so into this camp of, well, I'm only scanning everything or I'm only PVSing this. The reality is use the best tool for the right job, okay? I haven't taken a diagnostic impression of a patient. I can't remember the last time. But I had a case last week where I was cutting off these really, really old feather-prepped margins that were literally down on the bone. And guess what? That one, I took a PVS impression just because they were so far down there that the beam of light, I could have probably got 1.5 out of the 3 crowns in that quadrant, but I would have struggled with the other ones. And so that's why, again, I just switched materials and moved to the PVS. So use what's best for the case.
Thank you, doctor. This next question from Dr. Lupe Poussin. Any advice to take the bite in full arch cases?
Yeah. So again, the first advice I'd say is like I talked about in there is make sure you tap, 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 tap. If you're going for full arch if you've got a full arch of prep, I don't know what you're talking about relative to full arch, whether it's full arch implants, full arch preps of teeth, what you're doing. If you have full arch set of teeth, okay, what I do is I will have my provisionals on the one side, and then I will scan the other side, my bite that way. That way my provisionals are getting me into CR, and they're holding the occlusion and the vertical in the proper spot. So what I do is I've got my provisionals on this side. I will go ahead and scan this side of preps over there, and then that's when I take my first bite. And then again, I put the provisionals on this side, and then my second bite, I take it on that side. So use your provisionals. If a patient has a big CR-CO shift on there, then what I'll do is usually manipulate people into CR with bite registration. And then I'll take half of the bite registration out and hold them in that side, scan the other side where the preps are with the bite registration, and go that route. So those are the two different ways that we'll generally do it, but you've got to use something to keep yourself in the right vertical position.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Ludlow. Also, Dr. Cynthia Levenka says thank you for your earlier response.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Well, that is all the time that we have now. We are a little bit over the top of the hour, 9:02 here on the East Coast. But I want to thank you again, Dr. Ludlow, for a really edifying presentation. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. We did record tonight's webinar. And as I said earlier, we are going to be emailing out the recording sometime in the next week. We would also appreciate your feedback via our survey that's going to pop up on your screens shortly. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.